Hello, this is Chris Anderson again from St. Mary's Catholic Church in Corvallis. I've served as a deacon there for many years. In fact, the end of this month, the end of November 2021, is the 24th anniversary of my ordination as a deacon. What I'd like to do today, very briefly, is share a reflection, a kind of a short homily that I've written on the idea of Christ as King, the idea of kingship, the kingship of Christ. This upcoming Sunday is the Feast of Christ the King, the last Sunday in ordinary time before the beginning of Advent. Here comes Bumble, my prayer dog, to try to help me with this. And it's just very interesting that this is the last feast before the beginning of Advent, that we move from the kingship of Christ to anticipating the birth of a child. And in a way, that's what I want to talk about. The readings are from the Gospel of John. It's from the scene where Jesus is in a conversation with Pilate, and Pilate is trying to get him to say who he is. And I'm also going to refer to a passage, and this is also one of the readings for this upcoming feast day, from Revelation, that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, that he was and he is and he ever will be. And this is a short reflection, and I want to just read it. This is another thing that I'm sort of playing with and have been as a preacher for a long, long time. Is I'm perfectly comfortable talking spontaneously. I'm a teacher, retired teacher. I taught for many, many years at Oregon State. I'm a retired English professor. And I would just go in with a few notes and just talk, which is part of the problem when I preach. Is if I don't prepare, if I don't have a written text, I will talk for 50 minutes, because that's how long. It's easier to talk at length when you're not prepared. But it's not just that. I'm very interested in writing for preaching. It's different than writing for reading, but still, there's something about the I'm not trying to make a big claim for my little prose pieces or for my longer homilies, but there's something to be said for trying to match or be in rhythm with the rhythms of the Mass, the opening prayer and the Eucharistic prayer, and so on, to try to maintain, some sense of both the plainness of the language of the Mass and of Scripture too. Importantly, of Scripture. The plainness of it, and yet at the same time it's majesty. It's majesty in its simplicity. Again, not to try to claim that my writing is majestic. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start really high, talking about, it's sort of pretty high level Christology. But what I'm really interested in is something small and specific, and very much a matter of my day-to-day life. And that's in the title. Jesus must have been distracted too. Jesus was fully human and fully divine. And we make a mistake when we think he was one and not the other. Usually, that he was just divine. We are fully human and partly divine. And we make a mistake when we think we are one and not the other. Usually, that we are divine. All our problems and struggles come from the assumption of our own divinity. We think we are in charge. We think we are in control. We think we are the king. Jesus isn't divine in spite of his humanity. He doesn't have to escape his humanity in order to become divine. His humanity and divinity so intersect that we can't separate one from the other. Jesus tells Pilate in today's gospel, the gospel for the feast of Christ the King in John, Jesus tells Pilate that his kingdom is not of this world. And it isn't. And it is. He is the King of all creation, the firstborn of the dead. He could call down all the armies of the angels, but he doesn't. He is the Alpha and the Omega. Through him and in him, all things were made. And yet there he stands in his body on that cold marble floor as Pilate sentences him to death. He is not a king in the way we understand kings. He is not divine in the way we understand divinity. Lately in prayer, I've really been struggling with distractions. My thoughts are all over the place, and they're my thoughts about my plans and my projects. It's as if the conversation between Pilate and Jesus in the Gospel of John is going on in my head, and Pilate is winning. I want to be the king of my own mind. I want to be my own master. And yet I can't even manage that. But I take solace in the thought that Jesus must have been distracted too. When he woke up in the morning and sat down to pray, he must have found himself thinking about all kinds of things. He must have struggled, as we all do, to let go and be in the moment. I don't mean that Jesus sinned. Jesus is without sin. But being distracted isn't sinful. It's human. It's just who we are. What I imagine is that when Jesus was praying and his mind began to wander, he did what he calls us to do. He smiled, he opened his hands, and he said, "Here I am, Lord. I come to do your will."